Sensory systems. Background. What is it like to be a bat? The title of Nagel's now famous philosophical paper is meant to conjure up images that are foreign to most humans, such as hanging upside down in a dark cave or swooping through the night to catch insects, 1974. Although originally posed as a challenge to reductionist theories of consciousness, this hypothetical thought experiment raised an important question in comparative cognition research. Is it possible for one individual to understand another individual's, or more accurately another species', experience? Nagel carefully selected bats for the title of his article because their primary interaction with the sensory environment is echolocation. Humans may understand how echolocation works, but, with rare exceptions, see box 1.4, they have never experienced this phenomenon. According to Nagel, this means that bats and humans have a different knowledge of the world. One is not necessarily better, more advanced, or even more intelligent than the other. They are simply different. The analogy extends beyond echolocation in that most animals possess some sensory ability that is absent in humans. A fascinating example of these species-specific sensory abilities is provided by the mantis shrimp, Odontodactylus scalaris. Mantis shrimp can detect a broader range of the visual spectrum than humans, whose vision is restricted to a narrow band of red, green, and blue wavelengths. Human vision is also limited to non-polarized light, sunlight that scatters randomly in all directions. Polarized light is created when sunlight is reflected off a surface, like water or snow, so that it is oriented in a linear direction, i.e. horizontally. Humans experience polarized light as a steady glare, which they minimize with polarized sunglasses. Other species, including many insects, can see polarized light, but, to date, the mantis shrimp is the only animal known that can also detect circular polarized light. ch2 et al., 2008. This visual experience is created underwater when light scatters up toward the surface and is reflected back down. Mantis shrimp detect circular polarized light via 6 rows of numerous small eyes which move independently and are arranged at exactly the right angle to convert circular light waves into signals that the other cells can detect. Humans wearing special goggles that do this conversion see circular light as a bright, steady glare. No one has determined the function of polarized light detection in the mantis shrimp, although one possibility is that it allows secret communication within the species, as reflections of polarized light from a mantis shrimp body would be invisible to other animals. Chapter plan. According to Nagel, humans will never understand the perceptual experience of a bat or any other animal, but this has not inhibited scientific investigations in this area. This chapter presents an overview of that research, focusing on the basic properties of sensory system evolution, development, and function across species. An understanding of these topics is critical for the remainder of the text, in that all cognitive processes are influenced, at least initially, by sensory input. In other words, sensory systems provide the first point of contact between an organism and its environment. Information gathered about the sensory world is used when animals remember events, navigate through new or familiar territories, and communicate with conspecifics. These and other cognitive processes must function within the ecological constraints of individual species, e.g., communication will be different in aquatic and non-aquatic environments. Because of this, highly specialized sensory systems have evolved in many species. But this is only the first step. A fully functioning sensory system also depends on sensory experience that is acquired during an animal's lifetime. This chapter describes how these two processes, evolution and development, interact in a way that allows organisms to function effectively, i.e. to survive and reproduce, in their environment. The chapter then moves on to a discussion of sensory system function, divided into detection and processing. Sensory detection begins when physical signals carrying information from the environment, e.g. light or sound waves, reach the animal. This information is transmitted to the central nervous system and onto different brain regions where it is processed. Despite differences in sensory abilities, a comparison of sensory detection and processing across species reveals a number of general principles of sensory system function. Sensory processing involves the segregation and organization of incoming information, which must then be recombined so that organisms can interpret the world around them. How this occurs is covered in the final sections of the chapter under the topics perception and attention. Evolution of sensory systems. The bat and mantis shrimp examples in the chapter opening reveal that there are some types of energy, i.e. ultrasonic vibrations and circular polarized light, that humans cannot detect. The same is true of magnetic and electrical fields. Humans must rely on technology to sense these signals, whereas many birds and fish do so naturally as they locate prey or return home from distant locations. Even for energy sources that humans can detect, they often do so within a much smaller range than other animals. For example, humans see vibrant colors in flowers, but not the ultraviolet reflections that guide many insects to their food. And although they can detect odor cues from conspecifics, few humans could track another animal by following their scent on the ground. See Figure 2.1. These species' typical differences in sensory abilities allow animals to adapt to the particular ecological constraints of their environment. This may explain why the human auditory system is finely tuned to the range of sound frequencies in speech, an obvious advantage for a species that relies so heavily on verbal communication. Figure 2.1. Coyote tracing prey in Death Valley National Park, California, USA. So they can trace prey by scent. Visual adaptation. Sensory system adaptation has been studied extensively in terms of vision, an ability that varies widely across species. In all animals, the visual system works by absorbing light of particular wavelengths along the electromagnetic spectrum. Humans see within a 400 to 700 nm range, nanometer, I'm guessing, the visible spectrum, because they have chemical pigments in the eye to absorb these wavelengths. Animals that inhabit environments with different patterns of light absorption, such as aquatic habitats, have evolved different visual sensitivities. Muntz, 1958. For example, red, yellow, and orange wavelengths are absorbed at shallow water depths, so many marine species are more sensitive to light within the blue spectrum. In addition, because little light reaches the bottom of the ocean, some deep-sea species are able to emit and detect chemical light, bioluminescence, which is created when organic compounds are mixed together. Bioluminescence is a marine phenomenon, although a similar process can be observed on land with fireflies. In marine animals, bioluminescence occurs in the internal organs, which then glow in the dark. Fish in these environments have small eyes which are able to detect bioluminescence emissions, most of which appear as a blue hue to humans. Evolution has also favored traits that help to enhance vision in land-dwelling animals with different lifestyles. For example, many nocturnal animals have eyes with large pupils and lenses that allow them to pick up more light. Some of these differences are displayed in Figure 2.2. Compared to diurnal animals, nocturnal animals also have a much higher proportion of rods than cones. Rods and cones are the cells at the back of the eye that detect light and color. Rods are 1,000 times more sensitive to light than are cones, so nocturnal animals can navigate very well in the dark, but often have difficulty discriminating colors. The reverse is true for humans and other animals that function primarily during daylight hours. Figure 2.2. Eye structure of 3 different animals, deep-sea fish, owl, and human. Compared to diurnal humans, the nocturnal animals have larger lenses that can pick up more light. So first we can look at the human eye. So it has a lens, the pupil and retina, and then an optic nerve at the back. And then the owl has a lens and retina, and the deep-sea fish also has, they all have optic nerves at the back, and then the deep-sea fish has a big lens. Another factor that has a huge impact on what animals see and their environment is eye placement. Humans and other primates have frontally placed eyes, which means that they have very good binocular, but very poor lateral vision. Binocular vision occurs when the two visual fields overlap, meaning that much of what is seen with the right eye is also seen with the left eye and vice versa. But the images are not exact. The small distance between them means that there is a slight disparity between the visual input that reaches the right and left eyes. The brain uses this information to produce depth perception, the ability to see the world in 3 dimensions, including which objects are further away. Binocular vision is not the only cue for depth perception, but it is one of the most important. Animals that have eyes placed in different positions will have different levels of binocular vision, as represented in Figure 2.3. Figure 2.3. Visual fields of 3 different animals: horse, owl, and human. The laterally placed eyes in the horse provide a large monocular field on each side of the head and a small binocular field in which the 2 eyes can see the same image. In contrast, the frontally placed human eyes provide a large binocular field and smaller monocular fields of vision. The owl's eye placement and corresponding monocular and binocular fields are between the other 2 species. Okay, so you can see for the horse, most of the vision is the left and right monocular fields, so each of those are 140 degrees, and then the binocular field is only 65 degrees out of the 360. For an owl, okay, so the left and right monocular field are 90 degrees each, and the binocular field is 70 degrees, so they're quite similar. And for a human, the binocular field is the largest at 114 degrees, and the left monocular field is 64 degrees, and the right monocular field is also 64 degrees. Compared to binocular vision, laterally placed eyes permit a much wider field of view. Even if depth perception is reduced, animals that have eyes on the sides of their head, therefore, are able to see behind them, which has obvious advantages for avoiding predators. Indeed, a general rule of eye placement is that predators have frontally placed eyes, allowing them to track prey more effectively, whereas prey animals have laterally placed eyes, allowing them to detect these predators. See Figure 2.4. Given that vision is often directed toward other organisms, understanding visual system function in one species may provide functional explanations of physiological traits in another species. See Box 2.1. Figure 2.4. Eye placement of 2 different bird species. The predator, eagle owl A, has frontally placed eyes, whereas the prey, Victoria crowned pigeon B, has laterally placed eyes. Box 2.1. Why do zebras have stripes? To most people, stripes are the defining characteristic of zebras, making them easy to distinguish from other animals of similar size and shape. See Figure 2.5. The stripes are not sexually dimorphic, meaning that the trait is similar in males and females, and there is no evidence that stripes make zebras more attractive to members of the opposite sex. With no apparent reproductive advantage, scientists struggled to formulate a functional explanation for this highly conspicuous trait. One hypothesis is that body stripes provide protection against predators because the pattern helps zebras to blend in with the long grass around them. Lions, Panthera leo, the zebra's primary predator, are colorblind, so it doesn't matter that the color of the stripes does not match the grass. In addition, when zebras stick with their herd, which they usually do, lions may see a large mass moving in unpredictable ways rather than individual animals. This makes it difficult for lions to single out and attack the weaker zebras in a herd. Stripes may also deter blood-sucking insects that deliver annoying bites and carry potentially dangerous germs. In an experimental test of this hypothesis, horseflies were less attracted to striped models of horses than to either solid black or solid white ones. Egri et al. 2012 In fact, narrower stripes were the most effective insect repellent, which may explain why a zebra's thinnest stripes are on the face and legs, the body areas most vulnerable to insect bites. According to the authors, insects such as horseflies are attracted to polarized light because it is similar to light reflected off water surfaces. Black and white stripes disrupt the reflective signal of polarized light, making it less likely that the insects will land on these animals. Regardless of whether one or both hypotheses are correct, it seems likely that zebra stripes evolved as a mechanism of protection for these animals, but it was only through studying the visual systems of other species, i.e., zebra predators and pests, that humans were able to reach this conclusion. Sensory adaptations in closely related species. The visual adaptations described above illustrate how dramatic differences in ecological circumstances alter sensory abilities. More subtle differences in sensory traits can be observed in closely related species that inhabit similar environments. For example, several snake species are able to detect chemical, visual, and thermal cues, but they show greater sensitivity to one type of cue or the other, depending on their prey preference. Midland rat snakes, Scotophis spiloides, which feed primarily on rodents, respond to chemical cues, allowing them to follow rodent odor trails. In contrast, western fox snakes, Mintonius vulpina, respond at higher rates to visual cues, matching their preference for ground nesting birds. This suggests that snakes inherit an adaptive tendency to respond to sensory cues, most likely to lead to prey capture. Moreover, as snakes age, their metabolism and ability to consume larger animals change, leading to altered responses to cues associated with particular prey. Saviola et al. 2012. Cross-species comparisons, such as Saviola's research with snakes, support, but do not prove, that natural selection plays a role in sensory system evolution. Evolution of any cognitive process is difficult to ascertain, partly because the evolutionary record of many species is incomplete. Even if fossil records are available, they provide little information beyond brain size, so sensory system adaptations must be inferred by comparing sensory traits in contemporary species that evolved from a common ancestor. One of the best examples of this approach is an analysis of auditory abilities in insects, Yak 2004, specifically the detection of high-pitched sounds by whistling moths, Hecatesia exultans. Unlike most moth species, whistling moths and other moths in the Noctuid family have ears on either side of their thorax, near the wings. Moth species in the closely related Saturnid family have a nearly identical anatomical structure in the same region that provides feedback on wing position. Noctuid and Saturnid moths likely evolved from the same ancestor, and the authors speculate that a small mutation in these wing position sensors allowed a predecessor of the whistling moth to detect ultrasound emissions from bat predators. The survival advantage conferred to these mutants led to a proliferation of this trait in a subpopulation of moths. With further adaptations, descendants of the early noctuid moths could then use their auditory sensors to detect the high-pitched sounds of other moths. This evolution from wing sensor to sound detector likely occurred over many generations and may explain differences in intraspecies communication that distinguishes noctuid from saturnid moths. Other researchers have proposed similar models to explain intraspecies differences in other sensory systems, with general agreement that sophisticated sensory abilities only emerge with high ecological demands. The processing of sensory information is costly in terms of metabolic energy, so sense capacities that are not needed are often diminished or lost. In other words, selection pressures reduce sensory traits that are too costly to maintain. One example is a loss of visual function in species that inhabit environments with minimal light. It is difficult to trace the evolution of this decline in the natural environment, but the phenomenon has been demonstrated in the lab. Tan et al. 2005. Lab-bred fruit flies, Drosophila melanogaster, show a reduction in eye size that is related to their time in captivity. Presumably this occurs over generations, as the need for vision is reduced when animals are not required to locate food or mates.